Welcome to the Evolved Caveman, where men learn to be successful and happy with your host, Dr. John Schinnerer, as he shares the most impactful ideas and practices for you to get the most from your relationships, your work, and from your life. Now here's Dr. John.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. John Schinnerer with the latest episode of The Evolved Caveman. And today I am really honored to have with me Robert Kandell. And Robert is an interpersonal communication expert, a speaker, podcaster, and the author of the best-selling book, Unhidden, a book for men and those confused by them. Since 2002, Robert's mission has been to help people find themselves and use their internal power to live their best lives. He has helped thousands of students up-level their communication, leading them to live more balanced, energized, connected, and purposeful lives. He is the host of the podcast, as you can see behind him, Tough Love, where he puts his compassionate, hard-hitting insight to work helping people move forward in their lives with clarity. He's been described as part football coach, part loving dad, and part slightly crazed drill sergeant. Mm-hmm. Website for Rob is robertkandell.com, and you can reach him on Twitter at Robert Kandell. Among other things, there will be more links in the show notes if you'd like to contact him. Robert, how you doing?
I'm great. So happy to be on your show.
Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. So let's talk a little bit about, in your book, you talk about men kind of covering up and hiding. Let's start there. I mean, it has to do with living authentically, yeah?
Well, it's society teaches us to hide. And we get rewarded actually for hiding, and we're taught that, because what's the antithesis? The antithesis, we show our emotions, show our fear, show our anger, and there's a pushback from being a young boy with all the name calling. Don't be a baby, don't cry, don't be a girl, don't show any emotions, to being an adult and also like, oh, he's not a strong man, he's not a solid man. And so it's very confusing with the being human and the vastness of the human experience, and also being told, be a certain way at certain times with certain people and don't crack it, or the impact will be you won't get what you want, which is usually, women, power, money, prestige.
I would add happiness to that too.
I don't know if men want happiness as much as women, power, or prestige. I think they perceive happiness inside those things, but I don't. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, to me, we're all after happiness. We just think that we're going to get there through different paths. And so the paths that we men are socialized to pursue are what you're talking about. Yes. Women, drugs, sex, power, wealth. I mean, all those things, a nice car. But I can't tell you how many men that I've worked with that are, 45 to 55 that are worth $100, $200, $400 million. And they're like, John, I'm miserable. Like, I did everything right and I'm still not happy.
Right.
So I think you figure it out later on down the road. I think for many years of our lives, we're just doing what we're told we're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My viewpoint is, and it's actually my teacher's viewpoint, is that men get their value from their production, their ability to produce, and how well they're doing in that game, the game of production. And when it comes down to it, men who, like you described, have produced and gotten all the things and all the toys and all the experiences, and they still have no acumen about their emotional intelligence. They have no awareness about their own internal state of being. They've lived out other people's lives or desires for them rather than their knowing who they are. And that's the quote midlife crisis, but it's actually, to me, it's the best time because it's a waking up. It's an awareness of what's on the inside.
You mentioned that phrase midlife crisis, and I was just thinking, I wonder to what extent that's just a life crisis. In other words, I think we're socialized in a certain way, and I love the idea of Paul Kivel's work on the man box culture, where, to your point, we're supposed to be, or we learn to be at a very young age, invulnerable, self-reliant. We're not supposed to feel. We're supposed to be dominant. We're supposed to know everything. We're supposed to know everything about sex, all that stuff. We're supposed to produce. And when we don't, we step out. If we step out of the box, we get hit with those insults: stop being a pussy, don't be a bitch, don't be a little girl. And you learn real quickly, like, holy shit, I don't want to do that because it hurts to do that. So you start cutting off those parts of yourself. And then you just start playing the game with this kind of internal feeling of emptiness and this sense of longing that I think most of us have for most of our lives. We just kind of put it away and compartmentalize. And then you get to be about 40, 50, 55, and you're like, there's got to be more than just this.
Totally. And it's really confusing. And, I don't call it a midlife crisis. I call it, it's only a crisis because your life up to that point will be disrupted. Yeah. And disruption is scary because, the 6 things that Tony Robbins said people want is they want security, but they also want variety. So it breaks one of those rules, one of those things. And, my belief is that our deepest fears will end up alone, dying under a bridge, which, hits the abandonment issue, which poverty issue, like we're just afraid. And so what do? We shove down our desires that could impact us negatively. We live false lives, and then we don't really know who we are, and then don't know who we're married to or who our partners are, because we're not connected to this inner thing, because that inner thing can disrupt where we are in our lives.
One of the things, I think I've read about half of your book, which I greatly enjoyed.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know if I'll get to finish it, because that's normally what I do. I'll read half a book and then I want to see.
I totally know what you're talking about. I got the message. Okay. Yeah.
But I think one of your messages is that for many years in your life, you were living behind masks, as most of us do. And then you kind of woke up and started working on being more authentic and being better at communicating and being better in relationship. Is that true?
Yes. I had a big wake up call, March 20th, 1999.
Oh, you know the date.
Days before my 29th birthday. Yes.
Oh, you were relatively young.
I was relatively young. Well, so the story, and this is the first chapter of the book. So my goal in the book is to share my own experience, and also just say, like, boy, I've made a lot of mistakes on this road to becoming unhidden. Like, it was just, so many. But this one was my wake up call, because I was successful in terms of all aspects of society. I was married. I had a 5-bedroom house in San Francisco. I had a 6-figure job. I was rising up the corporate ladder. Like, everything was right, but I was also really disconnected from my wife. I was overweight. I was a workaholic and all these things. And so my wife said, "Hey, do you want to take a class on sex?" Well, when you're not having sex with your wife, and she says, "Do you want to take a class on sex?" The answer is yes. It really came out like a yes. And the long story short, 3 weeks later, I end up in this basement of this house in San Francisco. And there's a group of people, very attractive women and guys, and this class on sex. My little porn-infested mind was going crazy and really turned on. And I was the first one to do my introduction. And I did my introduction, and I thought it was brilliant and poignant and funny. I expected everyone to clap. I thought the teacher would make room for me on the couch. And he said, "Hey, do you know your wife's crying?" Oh, it was right there. She was a foot and a half away from me, right? And I was so egotistical and I was so in my own head and so unaware. I had no idea. Then the teacher, this brilliant guy from San Francisco, still working, his name's Erwan Devan, did the most perfect thing, horrible thing. He said, "Okay, who's next?" And so I got to sit in the burn of that for 2 more hours trying to recollect my ego. And it was the best thing possible, because it was a wake-up call. I actually started to see who I was and the impact of who I was. And, the first time my wife felt permission to show the impact I had on her. And it was, I had 2 choices. One was to stand up and go back to what I knew. Option number 2 was to be like, okay, let me figure this piece out. And that's led me on the most epic journey for the last 20 years.
Wow. So one of the things you mentioned, one of the phrases was, I was in my head. I was stuck in my head. And I see that with a lot of the men that I work with, and I've seen it in myself in past years. And I also see it when I get, threatened, or when I feel vulnerable, or when I feel scared. I'll retreat to thinking, I'll retreat to being in my head. Yeah. And I think it's one of the ways in which we're socialized as men, that, you stay in your head, you revert or regress to intellect and thinking, and you get out of your body, which I think is probably the worst way to go.
Well, being in your head and having linear thought, strategy, and skill sets, that's amazing for certain experiences. And then also there's the flip side of being in your body, your intuition, your awareness, your feeling sense. And that's amazing for situation. The master player from poker to relating to being a public speaker is both to have both the skill set of all the intellect, but also the awareness of what's happening in the room. So in that moment, I was fully in my frontal cortex, fully in, performance mode with no awareness, obviously, of what's happening. And so when I train men, especially around sexuality and relating and having presence, is like, you cannot outthink a woman. You cannot outthink a woman. Like, it's just, you can't relate to a woman like the way you deal with your car or your computer or your stock. Like, it's very different. You need to use all aspects of yourself. And that's what women want, is they want the full, complete package, the brilliant strategist, but also the feeling vulnerable, aware male. And that's the best package to work on.
Yeah. And I totally agree. I think that the more we can integrate heart and head, or, thought and emotion, the better the relationships we're going to have. It's just that the way that we men are socialized is we're socialized in the exact opposite direction. So growing up, if we show any emotion, if we show too much, sadness or fear, it's stop being a pussy. If we show too much love, romanticism, joy, excitement, it's don't be so gay. And you learn really quickly that you're left with, I would argue anger, lust, or stress, some degree of anger, annoyance, frustration, whatever. But that's what we can demonstrate safely without fear of being humiliated. And we don't like to be humiliated, I've found.
No. And just know that this is not a man's fault. This is
exactly,
like, really, to give some context for this. If you think about the evolution of man, and you're, the evolved caveman, like if you think about the evolution just around the concept of the patriarchy has been around for 6,000 years, really from anywhere from 1500 to 2000 BCE, depending on what historian you look at, but 6,000 years. And these changes we're talking about, this motivation for men to get into his emotional body, is really about 40 to 50 years old. It's a drop in time.
Yeah.
It's like 1 or 2 generations at the most, compared to the hundreds of that 6,000 years. And the scripts handed down from generation to generation saying, your emotions are dangerous in most situations. Now the modern man, where we live in a technological world, we're not in the biosphere, we're in the technosphere, we have this opportunity that's brand new, and guys are not trained by their fathers and grandfathers how to be in today's world. And instead of saying, I need help, they're being like, okay, I can force my way through it, or I can disconnect, which is, to me, is just stupid. It's just foolish.
We're also socialized not to ask for help. I mean, that's
right.
The socialization process is it shows weakness to ask for help.
Right.
But it's funny because a lot of these things that we need to move forward and evolve and progress and learn and grow, we're socialized in the exact opposite way, which really hamstrings us in a lot of areas, I would argue.
100%. I agree 100%.
So let me ask you this. So, what's the effect of withholding that authentic part of yourself, or that truth, or the emotional side of yourself from your partner? What do you see as the effects of that?
Completely. Well, first off, it depends on your goals. If you want a status quo, mediocre, nice relationship, then it's a great strategy, because then you're thinking, I can show these 17 things and I cannot show these 4 things, or I might be able to show these 11 things. Like, we're thinking, we're strategizing. And if you want to be in what I call a mediocre relationship, no judgment on mediocre, but just a status quo mediocre relationship, then do it. But if you want a dynamic, optimized, passionate, intimate relationship, by definition, you got to put all your cards on the table, every single one of them. That weird thing you like to watch on porn, that you get turned on by cross-dressers, you always hate your job, or you always wanted to meditate on a mountain in Peru, or do you want to do plant medicine? Like, whatever it is, you have to put all your cards on the table. Now, not at once, not vomiting your truth with deliberate precision. But if you hide one thing from your partner, my belief is then you cannot trust your partner. And my math behind this is this. I hold something inside. I know you don't see it. I then know that you're relating to my facade, because I know you're relating to the facade then you don't really know me. Therefore, I can't fully trust you. So I can't show this card or these cards, because then the whole thing blows up. So it's a disconnection.
And I think one of the things that enters into that is that we get so fearful of being judged negatively, you do withhold, or you can get in a dynamic in a relationship where one of the partners gets annoyed or frustrated or hurt when the other person shares their truth or how they feel. And that shuts down the sharing as well.
Yeah, that's our fear. We'll die alone under a bridge. Like we're just afraid that if we show these parts of ourselves, we're going to end up by ourselves, which is possibly true. I'm not trying to sugarcoat this and say, if you like watching gay porn, your partner might not leave you. That is a valid fact. And would you rather be with someone who doesn't know you for the rest of your life in this mediocrity status quo, or would you rather take the risk of really revealing yourself? Would you rather show all your cards and be with a person who truly knows you? That is the choice. That is the player's choice in the game.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking with William Pullen, who's a psychotherapist and author out of London a couple of days ago. And it's interesting. We were talking about the different layers involved in these conversations. And I think he got a little nervous because we were going into areas where it's dicey to talk about, like they're uncomfortable conversations. And I think to have a lot of these conversations, you really open yourself up for criticism, because at least I don't have sufficient language a lot of times, like just to even go back and talk about the insults that we receive as boys. That can make people uncomfortable. That can make people angry. It can trigger things. And it's really, a lot of these conversations are difficult to have. Do you get a lot of pushback from men or women, I suppose, but when you're having these conversations?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, here's the other part of the book that's really important is where, I think we talked about this briefly, but we're external validation junkies, right? So we're looking externally to have us believe that we're doing it right. And often that is a woman. If we're with a hot woman having sex with us, then things are good. That's kind of like the basic core foundation. And we look externally and we depend. It's like every day going to an expensive gas pump and filling yourself up with validation. I teach men to have internal validation, self-belief, self-love, self-esteem being built upon esteemable acts, really doing the things to empower. So we have our own internal motor. We don't need to go to another gas station. We just wake up and be like, I'm the badass. I'm amazing. I'm powerful. And then we don't depend on external circumstances for our validation. We don't depend on the woman or the car or the job or the stock portfolio. We just know sorry, go ahead. Finish. I'll just finish my last thing. When you know you're a good man, then criticism becomes interesting. Other people's viewpoints become fuel for you to become a better player, a better man. So when you believe and truly in love in yourself, then you don't worry about criticism. On some level, you invite it.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point, the internal versus external validation. And the other thing I would add to, for those men out there that are looking to develop more internal validation, the other thing I would add to that is having your own top 2, 3, 4 values. Be really clear on your values, on why you're doing what you're doing, whether it's serving others or love or creating wealth or, physical exercise, physical health. I think that's a big part of it as well as esteemable acts, as you put it.
Yeah. And that, to me, those are the esteemable acts. So I didn't want to go to the gym this morning. I was like, you go to work, get a little shit. I was like, go to the gym. You'll feel better. I go to the gym 30, 40 minutes doing those damn planks on this airbag, and I wake up like, I feel great.
The other piece of that is that we're creatures of habit. So I talk to a lot of men about developing positive, pro-social, constructive habits. And, you can use that habitual nature, if you will, to good ends or negative ends, to positive or negative ends. And so a lot of times it's like, I'm smoking a cigarette. Well, why are you smoking? I don't know. It's a habit. Like you do it, or you reach for the drink without any awareness. You just, it's a habit. It's like every night at 6, I have a drink. And the other way to go with it is let's start putting habits into place, like going to the gym 4 or 5 days a week. So where it's, if it's Monday at 8 in the morning, I go to the gym. And part of the reason for that is we don't have to stop and argue with ourselves about, oh, I don't feel like it, or it's cold out there, or I don't have the right clothes, or whatever because it only takes a little thought, which is an excuse to keep you in bed sleeping.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, there's a lot of documentation on if you miss one gym from your routine, it's like 60%. I don't know, I made these up, but like it's significant percentage you'll miss the next one and you'll fall out of your routine. So to me, it's just like, okay, do the things that have me feel good about myself. Then when my wife says, this thing you did really annoyed me, then instead of me being in my ego defending, oh yeah, well, you do this thing that annoys me, I could be like, oh, like I can actually stop. I can have presence. I can be with her. I can understand her experience. I can validate. Even if I completely disagree with her, I can still say, oh, I could see how that's challenging. Oh, I could see how that behavior, which had really, benign motivations, could be annoying to you. I apologize. Let's work on this together. But if I don't believe in myself, I'm screwed.
Let's step back a second there and break that down second by second. So let's say you get criticism from your wife or a suggestion on how to be different. And you have that decision to go and stay with it in curiosity and be present versus get triggered, get defensive, start accusing her of something she's doing. Is there anything that you notice physiologically in your body that's a tell to make you say, I need to slow down and pay attention here?
It's a raising of the blood pressure. It's like I can feel my body get activated. There's different parts of the brain. Part of the brain is, your prefrontal cortex, and then you have your reptilian part of your brain, which is the oldest part, and that's your fight or flight. And so, and there's the amygdala, which actually controls everything, anyway. So I can, when I'm in those situations, I sometimes can feel, and it almost feels like, when an animal gets scared, it gets bigger, like the cat's fur expands, or, I can feel that in those situations. I can feel my physiological need to defend myself in second 0.08. But then, through a lot of experiences, I then respond to the stimuli. I extend the period between response and stimuli and then be like, okay, do I really want to push back? How is that going to invalidate her? And what's the impact of that? Or do I want to breathe, increase my presence and be like, okay, let's talk about that.
Excellent answer. Thank you. Yeah, I notice it in my chest. Like I'll get a tightness in my chest, but also the heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up.
Yeah.
Jaw might tighten a little bit. But I think that's one of the things that is helpful for people to tune into in the moment to say, I'm starting to get triggered here.
Yeah.
I'm starting to get activated.
Yeah. And I don't know how far we want to go down this road, but when I get triggered, then I get to say, oh, there's a part of me that's unseen. It's in my shadow. It's not aware. It's the parts where I get triggered. To me, life gets more interesting. What is it about that that's triggering me? Why is the way she said X, Y, and Z? What does that get to me? And then, my relationship with my wife, it's really amazing because we have space for each other to reflect. Wow, when you said that, that really got me angry. And she's like, oh, what happened? And she's actually curious, like, oh, what happened? And then we dig into it. And often it's, some childhood thing, it's some father wound, it's some mother wound. So the point is that if you're interested in expanding your skill set, if you want to become a master player, you need to have space between stimuli and response to choose the most optimized response for growth, intimacy, and mastery.
Yeah. And actually there's research that shows that between that stimulus and response, so your wife criticizing you and your anger, for example, the research shows that there's a third of a second before you get angry after the trigger. And people, like I talk to people and they're like, third of a second, like shit, that's not long at all. And it's like, well, yeah, it's really fast. I get that. And we're also talking about the speed of thought. So at the speed of thought, you can insert a thought or two in there to say, breathe, relax, I need to excuse myself, something to get yourself out of there before you start to do things or say things that you're going to regret. And with practice, with awareness, you can actually elongate that gap between stimulus and response, to your point.
Utterly true. And it's hard. I mean, I don't want to make this sound easy. Like
It's not.
it's
I'm still
really
working
hard. Right. I will work on the rest of my life. And, I've been doing this development work for 20 years, like from that moment, the March 20th, 1990 moment. Like I dedicated my life to this, and still, my wife will say something and be like, like masculine pride, arrogance, hate, anger, hatred of women, it all comes up. I'm like, okay, thank you. So then
let me ask you a personal question. How do you deal with it when you fall down, when you fall short, when you fail?
I fall down and fail dramatically and epically. Like,
tell me more.
Well, I'm going to throw in another concept. Okay. So there's a book called Finite and Infinite Games. It's a guy named James Carse. He's a mathematician. The book itself is very difficult to read. It's actually a very strange book, but the concept behind it is amazing. He writes that there's two types of games. There's finite games, which are for win and loss. The goal is to win or lose. Soccer, chess. A lot of people have relationship as win or loss. And then there's infinite games, where the only goal of the infinite game is to continue the play. So when I fall down and make a mistake and trip and fail miserably, because I have my mindset attuned to my goal to be an infinite player, I look for the benefit, the value, the lesson of the finite loss, because infinite games are composed of finite games. And one really great example is Michael Jordan did this Nike commercial where he's like, 74 times I was to do the winning last shot and I missed, or what those stats are. It's amazing. It's the perfect example of someone who's the best because he learns from the things that, quote, fail.
Yeah, I think he said, I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot, 300 times, and I failed, 100. And he said, and because of that failure, I've risen and I've learned and I've continued to try, and because of that, I'm successful, something like that. You're right. It's an awesome.
Right. So men who are afraid of failing aren't living. If you live with the fear of failing, you're not fully living. And I made this decision that I want to fully live epically in my time on this earth, in this body.
Well, there's a couple things in there. I don't know if I'll remember them all, but one is that idea of learning from failure. I mean, there's a great saying, fail forward fast in business. Mm-hmm. And we men, I think, are socialized to fear failure, that failure impacts us in terms of our self-concept. So we don't like it because we don't like to be humiliated. Mm-hmm. So we tend to stay away from failure or situations that can really challenge us because we don't want that negative feeling associated with it. And so one of the things I'm also trying to encourage my clients to do is to reframe failure as challenging, as opportunity, as an opportunity to learn, as this is one of the greatest, most strongest, most powerful ways that we do learn. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a changing how you see, how you view failure, quote unquote.
Completely. I mean, my first business that I built, my third business, but my real first serious business, built it 10 years, 8-figure, 7-figure buyout, epic success. Second business, 6 months later, started, total failure. Lost, several $100,000, wasted 18 months of my life, quote unquote. And both have taught me so much. And so, some investors won't invest in entrepreneurs who don't have at least one failure. This is a secret a VC told me. He says, if I look at someone who's just had success after success and not failure, then I'm less secure because he hasn't learned from that experience. So I'm not saying go out and deliberately fail. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying when you fear failure, you're not fully living. You're sitting inside your comfort zone. You're not pushing the edges. And when you if you don't push the edges, you don't grow. But if your goal is to live in that comfort zone, God bless you. I'm 100% behind you. But if you want to become a master in anything, you need to push outside those places, which will lead to failures, which could be your greatest teachers.
So it's interesting you bring up the failed business. I mean, I had an entrepreneurial venture back many years ago that did well for about 6-7 years and then failed when the economy tanked. Mm-hmm. And it was really, really difficult emotionally. I mean, I got depressed for several months. I withdrew. And there was nothing harder at that time in life than to tell family and friends, hey, listen, the money that you entrusted me with is now gone, and those stock shares are worthless.
Yeah.
That was brutal.
Yeah.
How did you deal with your failure with that, if you want to call it that, with your learning opportunity?
Well, it's a failure. It was a business that failed. It was really hard because not only did I fail, but then my business partners bailed, literally went in the wind and left me holding the bag, like total, $50,000 I had to pay because they didn't keep their, anyway. So I had my own failure. And then I had the realization that the people I had been in bed with, not physically, but people in bed with didn't, left me. And so all these impact, and it took an extensive amount of therapy, extensive amount of sitting with plant medicine. It took an extensive amount of really realizing my motivations. And it still stings. It's been, years since then, 2 or 3 years since then. And it's still one of my greatest life lessons. And I'm so grateful. I wish it wasn't so expensive, but I'm so grateful because I love who I am today. I love the stories I get to tell. I love when I'm coaching someone and they talk about this failure, like, yeah, you think you got problems back in 16, like you get to be the old wise man who's been around the block a couple of times. So I'm grateful for all my scars. I'm grateful for all these, quote, traumatic experiences because I love who I am today.
And I think that's a really good point. I was wondering if you would get around to it, that idea of one of the things I think that's the most powerful that comes out of those failures and those struggles is the increased empathy that you can have for other people in a similar situation later on down the road. I mean, like I went through a divorce 9 years ago, and it should have been just a regular divorce. And my ex-wife, my wife at the time, decided she felt entitled to certain things and dragged us into litigation. And it became really contentious. And it didn't need to be that way. And it's one of the more contentious divorces that I've seen. And I help quite a few people through divorce or try to not get divorced. And it gives me a degree of empathy and understanding of the suffering and what they're feeling and what they're going through in that moment. And that was the way I framed it when I was going through it is, this really sucks. This really is painful. And I'm going to be able to learn a lot from this experience that I can use to help other people down the line. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can live and learn theoretically from books and movies. And, there are certain things that's great for. Like, I don't want to, be tortured. I don't want to there's certain things I can read a book, right? But other aspects of life, like I really want to understand it physically. I want to understand it in my body and my soul. And so I don't want to learn just from a book. I want to learn from living. And again, and I want to be really clear, like, let's be deliberate about what life experiences you want. Like, we can magnetize them to us if we're not deliberate. And for me, picking and choosing has been the best part of my life.
This is a little bit tangential, but you brought up sort of reading or learning from reading versus learning experientially. And one of my, I guess, pet peeves is, I've worked with a lot of adolescent males over the years. And I can't tell you the high percentage of adolescent males that say to me, I don't read, I don't like it, I don't get it. And I'm just like, oh my God, like you're doing yourself such a disservice with that story. And I get that it's not always easy. I get that it's challenging at times, but to me, it's the best way, or one of the best ways to learn empathy, to learn about other people, learn about other cultures, learn how others think. I mean, especially at a younger age when you don't have the experience and you haven't been able to travel the world. And it worries me a little bit that so many of these young men are just so turned off to reading. And what I see often is they're replacing it with a lot of gaming.
That's true.
And that's a little bit problematic to me.
Well, to me, it's inspiration, inspire them. And maybe find the right first book that really inspires them. Like I read, I was in high school and I read The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand.
Oh yeah.
Which was a thick book. It must have been 700-800 pages, right? And I wasn't reading much before that. And I read detective novels and soldier stories. And then someone said, you should read this book. I'm like, all right. And then I got hooked. And then I remember the impact of that, just like, oh my God, to go on such an epic journey, a lesson. And so sometimes you just have to offer the right book at the right frequency to get that kid inspired.
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember the story in my family is that my parents went to the school psychologist back when I was like in, I don't know, first grade or something. And they said, John likes to read a lot. Should we limit what he reads? Should we censor what he reads? And the school psychologist, thank God for him, like God bless him, said, no, if he wants to read, let him read whatever he wants to read. Mm. And so as a kid, I would read comic books, and I loved comic books. And then, that got into other things, which, like Mad Magazine and ultimately National Lampoon. And, a lot of my friends' parents were like, well, you can't read that. That's dirty. Mm. But it kept my love of reading alive forever. Mm. And I think, again, sort of tangential, but I think one of the things our public school system does that's such a disservice to many of these young men is they squash curiosity. Mm-hmm. You have to study this, you have to study that. No, there's no room for choice in there. Like, just do that. And a lot of education, I would say, is feminized. So, mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at, like, I've had a lot of talks with young men about the books they're reading in English class in high school, and almost every one of them is dark and depressing. Mm. And it's like, where's the adventure? Where's, I don't know, Count of Monte Cristo? That's kind of old, but, something with a little bit more masculinity to it, or something that would interest young men more, mm-hmm. That would be a good way to go.
Well, the entire schooling system has been skewed. Yeah. Away from masculinity. There's some great books out there. The War Against Boys, Susanna Hoff wrote a book about that. It's a very interesting dynamic, less recess, in those forms. So,
well, more sitting, more raise your hand. It's if you think of us back on the plain, back in tribes where boys were taught to hunt and move, mm-hmm. and perhaps have a mentor while you're in line hunting for antelope on the plain. And now you fast forward to our current educational system, which to me is a relic from the early 1900s, where we moved into the industrial age. And they're training people to become good workers, to sit in cubicles. Like, it's not meant for young boys to sit for 8 hours without moving, without talking, raise your hand before you speak, here, have a break for 15 minutes twice every 8 hours. Like, it's not a good fit for us. Mm-hmm. And I can see where a lot of ADHD boys and energetic boys are just driven nuts by it.
Mm-hmm. And the people saying they have ADHD has increased like fivefold in the last 15 years. So, yeah.
So let's get back on track here. So talk to me about, let's go into a topic that everyone likes to talk about, sex. Like, let's go into a little bit about male-female sexuality and what enhances that, in your opinion.
Well, first is to understand, the motivations behind different sexualities. I'm speaking generalities here, but I'll just go with that. So most men really enjoy sex a lot for the pleasurable sensation, but also for the validation. They're doing it for a production. They're doing it to say they did it. There's a lot of, notches on the belt, and in this belief that if I have sex, especially as young men, then I'm better than if I don't have sex. So there's a lot of value or connotation. And then there's the advent of porn, which has been totally impactful, especially for young men.
Oh yeah.
Free porn has only been around since 2008, when a guy named Caveman, actually figured out how to monetize it. There's a great audio book called The Butterfly Effect by John Ronson, which I highly recommend if you want your eyes opened up about the impact of free porn. So, porn is really just so skewed sexuality in the 21st century. And then on the flip side, women tend to enjoy sexuality because of intimacy and connection and relating. It also has them feel attractive. So there's a reception around it. And so the motivations between men and women are very different. Men, tend to want to do the act, get out. Women tend to want to do the act to connect. And so that's a big issue in terms of relating. Then there's the flip side for women of, again, their validation, learning from a much younger age. I'm turning 49, and the idea of teens having sex was rare, and now it's happening all the time. It's especially with the advent of free porn I just mentioned. So again, it's very different motivations to have sex these days, and your ability to see the other person's motivation is the first step to understand how to have more fulfilled, connected intimacy.
Yeah, and I guess I would challenge it a little bit. I think what you're saying about men is true at a younger age, teen and early 20s or 20s. It fascinates me in the sense that I've talked to thousands of men over the last 30 years. And one of the questions that always interests me is, so, what was your first sexual experience like? Do you regret it? Like, how do you feel about it? That kind of thing. And almost 90% of men look back at their first sexual encounter and say, yeah, it didn't mean anything. I'm not really sure why I did it, but I guess it's that notch in the belt experience, right?
Yeah.
So I can tell my friends as part of it.
Right.
And I think that goes back to how we're socialized, which by the way, men, is not your fault. It's just your responsibility on how to learn how to undo it. But, but it's interesting to me in talking to so many men about this, that again, a large majority of men surprise me by saying, I'm not into one night stands anymore. I don't like it. I feel, a little bit guilty and maybe a little bit ashamed afterwards. I need the emotional connection.
Yeah. And that's something it sounds like your demographic is a little bit older than I was speaking of, in 30s and 40s. Again, when they had those, how much smarter we are in 30s and 40s than, we were in our 15s and 20s.
But some of these guys are in their mid 20s. Like, that's where I'm like, wow. And they might be skewed also because they might be feeling things more deeply, perhaps, than the average man. I don't know.
Well, the millennials are a very interesting generation in terms of their viewpoints around sexuality, in terms of more connected as well. So it is a changing time, and Gen Z, the teens now, be really interesting to see what happens with this upcoming generation.
Well, and speaking about the millennials, I have and I can't, there's no stats or research to back this up. This is all anecdotal, but I have talked to a lot of men in that millennial generation who are longing for more emotional connection, looking, in fact, for a relationship, and complain about the women their age who, it seems, and I want to couch this carefully, it seems have almost kind of flipped to a more masculine approach to sex, or traditionally masculine, where they're looking for the hookup. They're focused more on their career, and I think are a little bit disillusioned with what men their age have to offer, honestly.
Well, one of the things I've been reading about a lot is the bar being raised in terms of what women want to be in a relationship. So, if you go back to the 1950s and 60s, it was a man who was a provider. Now in the 21st century, the first part of this century, it's men who with the full boat, with the full emotional capabilities. And so men are lagging in terms of training in order to meet up with the higher standards that women are holding for men. And then women say there's no good guys out there, and the guys are saying, I'm here, but I don't quite know how to understand women, and there's no training. There's very lack of training, which causes the chasm to increase.
Yeah. Well, and not even a lack of training. It's that we're socialized in the exact opposite direction of what they're looking for.
Right.
Because in the 50s, it used to be, it was good enough to be a good financial provider as long as you didn't drink too much, didn't beat anyone, didn't yell at anyone too much. Like, that's a good husband.
Right.
Now it's, you got to be a financial provider, and there's more of a financial teamwork, I guess, approach. And then you've got to be, communicative, sympathetic, empathetic, understanding, a good listener, supportive. And, so the job definition for marriage has changed, but I would argue nobody told us men.
Right. Right.
We're not trained to do that. And, 75% of the divorces here in the US are initiated by women. And the biggest complaint I hear is, I can't communicate with my husband. I can't connect.
Right. And so, but my point is, with men, it's like, option number one is to get this information and step up and be like, okay, the game has changed. Like, we're like playing games. We like playing sports. The games gets harder. Some part of us like, oh, okay, I'll step up or I'll run. What women are complaining about is men are running from the challenge. And this is what I see, is that, they are shifting to porn, to video games, to hanging out with bros. there's a lot of evidence of that. The term adolescence is relatively new, starting around the beginning of the 20th century. The term, when you shifted from being a child to being an adult in the turn of the 20th century was, in your teens, you were getting married, you were getting a job, you were starting a career. Fast forward to, the 21st century, guys in their 20s and 30s. This is Michael Kimmel's work, Guyland and Angry White Men, really getting to, I'm going to live till 90. I might as well enjoy my adolescence until my 30s. And so we're in a definite wacky time between men and women. And women are saying that's not good enough. Like the bar is raised, which I think is great. And men have the opportunity to respond, to become masters at relating.
Yeah, I really like your point of taking it as a challenge and stepping up to the challenge. And sorry, two neurons just connected in my brain and brought me back to the comment that you were making about the infinite and finite games. And it made me think of, I don't think that men typically think about infinite games much. I think that we're socialized. We grow up being competitive.
Completely.
We really want to win. We hate to lose.
Right.
And it's interesting that I've talked to a lot of D1 athletes or pro athletes that get out of their sport that they love, and now they're in a relationship and they're married, but they haven't figured out that there's a trait within them that is competitiveness. And if you think of competitiveness on a 1 to 10 scale, they're like a 9 or a 10.
Yeah.
The problem is that competitiveness then bleeds over into their relationship. So when you have an argument, you're looking at the argument as, I'm going to win.
Right.
And it's not about winning. I mean, there's two different conversational styles. One is sort of debate, where I'm trying to win. The other one's more what I would call sort of a consultative approach, which is, I'm going to approach this with curiosity. We're going to get enough information on the table so that we can jointly agree on what's going on here. I'm going to ask questions. And it's more about listening and trying to figure out where the other person's coming from and then coming to a mutual agreement. That's a completely and radically different approach than, I'm going to win this bitch.
Right. I mean, my terms for this is collaborative versus antagonistic communication. When we get triggered, we tend to go into antagonism, or you're the enemy, rather than, okay, I'm triggered. Let's sit with my trigger. Then let's get back to collaboration. So this is hard. This is really hard if you're stuck in, the concept, the framework of a finite game. If I lose this game, then this means X, Y, and Z. It means I'm weak. It means she'll get over on me. It's like all this connotation that we've grown, being part of the society. So for, this framework of the infinite game of like, I just want to play. Like my best example was when I was a yuppie back in corporate America, back in the 90s. I
haven't heard that phrase in years.
Yeah, when I was a yuppie. There was a guy I loved to play racquetball with a passion. Loved it. It was my favorite sport to play. And I was working with this guy who was a floor trader, and he said, let's play racquetball. I'm like, yes. And then I was just good enough to beat him pretty much every single time, just like that 1 degree of skill level better. And then after one game, because he was so competitive, I could tell he was going to quit. And so what did I do? I started to throw games. I would win one and throw one. And I didn't care. I just wanted to play. And that was like the concept of the infinite game. I was, happy because I was playing my favorite sport. He was happy because he was winning. And so it was an infinite player continuing the game.
So how competitive would you say you are on a 1 to 10 scale?
It depends. I was more competitive when I was younger. I was a football player and I would get depressed when we lost. And I was a soccer player. I was competitive with the other boys in my class. Like I was an overweight, neurotic Jewish kid from New York. Like I was like not, I'm not doing well with the women and so envious and jealous of my fellow classmates. Felt competitive. And then, over my 20s and 30s, seeing this concept of collaboration, the optimal power, stop looking at other men as competitors, as allies, to share, to have friends be like, this woman's driving me crazy. I don't know what to do, for him to bring his experience. Just it morphed. I'm going on 50 years old, and like all life lessons has taught me the power of collaboration over antagonism is the right direction for me. And I recommend for others 99% of the time.
That whole concept of competitiveness just fascinates me. I mean, if I look back at my childhood and my adolescence, with distance, I realized, wow, I used to compete against everybody in everything I did. I mean, I was trying to get the best grade. So whoever was the smartest in any class I was taking was my competition. If I was playing a sport, whoever was the best on the team was my competition. If someone was going for a girl, I mean, it goes on and on and on. And I realized, I don't know, my late 20s, I guess, that's a really, really merciless way to live. I mean, it's one way that guarantees misery because you're never going to beat everybody and everything.
Yeah. And
I didn't try to be that way. That was just kind of what I think learned from my family of origin.
Yeah. And society, taught us that. And again, competition is great. Like, there's a guy, John Wineland. He'd actually be great on your show. I don't know if you heard that name before, but Wineland, John Wineland. He's a guy I've known for going on 8 years, and he runs men courses all over the world. And he's like 3 steps ahead of me in certain areas of the career. And I'm always like, damn you, John Wineland. And he's like, he got on stage with someone, and I was just like, oh, I wanted to be on that stage. And then, but to me, that competitiveness is a wake up call. It's information. It's like, I learned from him, and I learned from my feeling of being competitive. It motivates me. And so that to me is an optimized usage of competition to betterment on my own infinite game.
Well, and I think I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think that it comes back to values for me too, to some extent, that I think over time I've shifted that motivation to be better from competitiveness to, for instance, a lifelong love of learning. Or learning how to collaborate better, or learning how to be more emotionally aware or manage my emotions better, which I'm still working on. But so I think there's different motivations to be better and do better and strive. Yeah.
It's we're moved by inspiration or desperation, right? Like most of us, we don't move from the status quo. We don't get off the couch unless there's something inspiring us or something that's getting desperate, right? So it really, of course there's exceptions to our rule, but really like, I'm looking in the mirror and I'm seeing these extra 20 pounds for a month now, feeling a little soft, I'm desperate. I want to get rid of it. Or like I see someone working out and doing those pull-ups. I'm like, I want to do 20 pull-ups unbroken. Like, how do I do that? So it's like, I'm inspired by it. So human beings want the maximum results with the least amount of effort.
Yeah.
Right. And so our ability to be like, okay, let's put a little more effort in, then life can change with a snap of the fingers.
When there's a concept, a truism, I would say in psychology, that the negative is more powerful than the positive, to your point. And it makes me think, when I started my private practice 16 years ago, I really wanted to do positive psychology because that spoke to me. And when I started private practice with that push, it was really a lukewarm response. And then I was talking to a psychiatrist friend of mine. He's like, well, we need someone in the Valley to do anger management. I was like, well, I can do that. Like I could combine anger management with positive psychology. And then things really started churning. Yeah. But it really pointed out to me that people don't come in often for pursuit of pleasure or inspiration as much as they do for avoidance of pain. Because I think, the negative is 3, 4, 5 times as powerful as the positive.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's the way of the world.
I mean, oftentimes and I'm trying not to deal with angry men as much as I used to, because it's exhausting, but I still do. And the reason they come in often is because there's a mom or a wife that's saying, the wife will say, if you don't come in, if you don't see someone for this, I'm gone.
Yeah.
And that's the point where they're like, shit. All right. Like, I'll go see somebody.
Yeah. Like I wrote my book. It's a book for men and those confused by them. And I know most of the books that it's women giving them the book. Like that was part, because 80% of books are read by women, right?
Yeah, especially self-help books. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's like 85 or even higher percentage. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. But I know a lot of women have been like, okay, I'm giving this book. I gave this book to my son, or I gave this book to my guy. And now we have a shared language for some of the things you talk about, which is, really endearing for me, because I do want to create the bridge between men and women, because I think when they're in collaboration, there's so much power and so much beauty. And if they're in antagonism, which we're trained to be on some level because of the finite games, then there's disconnection and no one's really getting what they want.
Yeah. And it makes me think of Jed Diamond's work. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
Have you ever interviewed him?
I have not.
If you want, I can put you in touch with him. Great guy, great guest, amazing knowledge. Because to me, it's one of the biggest, questions is how do you get men in to begin to teach them? And how do you market to men, so to speak? And one of his tips, tricks, tactics is and he's written like 16 books. So one, he'll have a quiz in the beginning and he'll say to women, like, buy this, take it home, fill out the quiz. When you're sitting around the living room with your husband, just, oh yeah, that's interesting. Oh, oh yeah, definitely. And like tap into his curiosity. What is it you're doing there? Oh, nothing. Like you wouldn't be interested. Like that kind of play. I mean, I've also just, like leave your book around on her nightstand in the bedroom. Why is she reading this? But it's a really difficult question because I think we're so quick to anger and irritation, which when we're in that state, we just externalize blame. So if I'm angry at you, nothing's my fault. It's all your fault. So why would I have any reason to change what I'm doing?
Right.
And so to get underneath that is a challenge.
Yeah. I mean, inspiration or desperation, it really is. And the wife saying, hey, like, I want better sex life with you. Are you interested? Most guys be like, yeah, no, I'm interested. And, okay, let's take this course, or let's read this book, or let's watch this video. Let's listen to this podcast. Like, I learned my wife Morgan and I are so different on so many levels, but she's taught me so much, and I'm so grateful for it. Things I never would have conceived to validate women. I learned so much in my relationship with her, and I talk about the book about the miscues I had and how she taught me how to do it. But the point is like, wow, when we're open and if we feel secure and we're interested in becoming masters, then everything becomes interesting.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was planning a couples retreat with my girlfriend in Costa Rica. She's a therapist. We have a couples retreat planned in April in 2020, and we're trying to write out the marketing text. And it all seems to be aimed at the female in the relationship, more vulnerability, more connection, more intimacy, more communication. And I was like, and I'm saying, well, I think we got to put something in there for the men. And I was like, let's put something in there about better sex. You'll get better, hotter, more frequent sex, something like that. And, because I don't think more intimacy, more vulnerability, like that's not going to sell a man like, oh yeah, I need to go do that.
Totally. I mean, it really is like, yeah. But there's, you get a man interested, like he'll chase it like a dogmatic dog with a bone. Just like, okay, that's what happened to me. I was just like, I totally embarrassed myself in front of all these people. And it's been a life pursuit for 20 years since then to never be in that situation again, to avoid punishment, but also to understand the mechanisms of my mind and my soul and my ego. And it's been the most passionate, beautiful journey.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned a dog because I've often compared myself to a dog. Like, I don't really like running on a treadmill, but I know I need to do something to stay in shape. But if you put a ball or a Frisbee in front of me, I can run for days for that. Yeah. But on a treadmill, just on the sidewalk, not so much. But so I think I'm part dog.
We all are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, Rob, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
Tremendous conversation. And is there anything that I should have asked you but failed to do so?
I like to say the same thing at closing of interviews is this concept that men, you're doing it right. Like you're doing life right. We're improvising life. There's really no script. Every day is an opportunity to either beat yourself up for what you're not doing or celebrate what you are doing. And I just want to, just to shout out this concept that you can't go from bad to better. You can just go from bad to good. And then when you're a good, you can go to better. And then your better becomes your good. And then there's the next level of better. And so just really a shout out to say, like, you're doing this life right. You're perfect. And perfection includes the propensity for change in that you can actually be connected, spend more energy on creating and live an amazing life.
I think that's really well said. I like the phrase of the joy of being male and learning how to embrace being a man to its fullest.
Yeah.
That, you may be doing it well to this point and there are ways that you can do it better.
Indeed. Yeah.
So I really like what you're saying. So my guest today has been Robert Kandell. The podcast is Tough Love. The book is Unhidden. If you need to contact him, because he's an amazing guy, there will be contact information in the show notes. So once again, Robert, thank you so much. I've greatly enjoyed this.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.